And Top Story is always brought to you by Vodafone. We will not apologize. That is a response of global news giant Al Jazeera to the presidency. Jubilee House had written to Al Jazeera demanding an immediate retraction and apology from the broadcaster. And following their publication of that highly explosive gold mafia documentary that portrayed President Akufo-Addo as a beneficiary of an international gold smuggling syndicate. Now, the four-part investigation by Al Jazeera's investigative unit reveals a series of gold smuggling gangs in Africa who help criminals launder hundreds of millions of dollars, get enriched themselves while plundering their nations. In a part of the documentary, one Alistair Mateus claimed he smuggled up to $40 million worth of gold through Ghana every month, and also claimed to know President Akufo-Addo, who he says was his lawyer once. Here's the relevant portions of that particular documentary.
So, for example, Ghana government, Matthias Holding, I get the contract. I subcontract it to you. $100 million contract. Ghana government pays me $100 million. I give it to you, and you say it's $80 million.
The contract is inflated $20 million above its real cost. Matthias banks the $15 million for the corrupt politicians until they need it.
The Ghana president is a good friend of mine. In fact, he was my lawyer. Like Cyril Ramaphosa here, I know him. I know his kids. I'm always easy.
Well, the presidency wrote to Al Jazeera demanding that apology and a retraction. Today, we wrote to Al Jazeera asking Al Jazeera to tell us if they have written back to the Jubilee House with a response. They told us they have. We'll tell you the contents of that email to our request pretty shortly. But let's go into some of the details that the presidency laid before Al Jazeera. Very, very strongly worded letter to Al Jazeera. It was. And my colleague joins me in the studio, Kojo. So the presidency had made, some demands of Al Jazeera. But what specifically was the presidency unhappy about?
So from an alleged $100 million state infrastructure.
Apologies that we could not hear you earlier.
Okay.
We're detailing what the presidency had specifically requested of Al Jazeera in their letter to them, which Al Jazeera is now responding to.
So the presidency was unhappy about some claims that were made in that particular documentary. For example, the president said that the claim about the president acting for one Mr. Alistair Matthias was a baseless one. In that documentary, they claimed that acting for that Mr. Alistair Matthias implied that the president personally benefited from unlawfully from an alleged $100 million state infrastructure contract purportedly awarded to the same Alistair Matthias person. Now, in a letter dated 11th April 2023, which was in a response to Al Jazeera's letter that was brought to the presidency on 2nd of April, the president instructing his legal counsel, that Mr. Ko Abake Schumann, and acting on that instruction, informed Al Jazeera that the president had not been in active practice since 2000, and he had no recollection of acting as a lawyer, either personally or through his law firm, for that Mr. Alistair Matthias or his company, the Gold Rest Resources. So that's one particular thing that the presidency was unhappy about. Yeah.
But then we also got to learn a bit more about the interaction, the communications that was going on between Al Jazeera and the presidency before the publication. We got a bit more detail on that.
Yes.
The presidency made some demands of Al Jazeera when they first alerted them that this was going to be published.
So the presidency wanted Al Jazeera to respond to those adequately to allegations made in Al Jazeera's letter. Al Jazeera was thus requested to provide information on the period for which the president allegedly provided legal representation to this Mr. Alistair Matthias or his company, the Gold Rest Resources. Again, Al Jazeera was requested to provide details of this $1 million US tender for state infrastructure, allegedly given
100 million.
Yes, given to this Alistair Matthias, which of course the documentary sought to create the impression that the president benefited from that. So they wanted them to provide them better information so that the presidency could respond adequately to this particular allegation.
Did Al Jazeera comply before the publication went out?
Well, according to the letter from the presidency, Al Jazeera refused, to provide these details as requested, but it also went ahead to then air the documentary. Now, according to the presidency, getting to the end of the same documentary, there was a test that shown contradicting the content of the documentary. And again, they also spoke to this Mr. Alistair Matthias, and he also denied, that he knew that part of the documentary were not things that he could then verify for. So the presidency thought that then those parts should not have been part of the documentary.
And so on that basis that they went ahead to describe the documentary as malicious defamatory and a calculated attempt. And so when you add that bit to it, they hold the position that this was a deliberate attempt on the part of Al Jazeera, calculated to tarnish the reputation of the president and the government of Ghana. So they were asking, not just apologize, but retract it. Today, after a few days had passed, we wrote to Al Jazeera just around 1:30 there about, send them a mail asking, have you responded to our presidency? What did Al Jazeera what was Al Jazeera's response to us?
Okay, so I'm going to quote from them. And it says that we have responded to the letter from the president's office, correcting some parts of its content and clarifying various points. Since the documentary did not actually allege what the president's office has suggested it did, we will not be apologizing or removing it from publication. Our reply to the president's office was by way of a confidential letter. Thank you for your interest in Al Jazeera's journalism. Best wishes. Al Jazeera's I unit.
So they're clear that they also had a counter to the president's stance on the matter. And the bits that we just detailed as what formed the basis of the presidency's concerns, they say that they corrected some of the impressions because that's not what they had actually done. That's the Al Jazeera view.
And also, after correcting, they sought to clarify other points in the documentary and in that letter as well.
But the fundamental request was retract and apologize and do so immediately. To which they've responded, at least in their response to us, that we will not be apologizing or removing it from publication. So the key question now remains, what are the presidency's options now? Let's bring in lawyer Samson Lada Yenini, who joins us now on the line. Samson, what are the options?
Well, the path is now clear for the presidency if they meant what they put in their letter demanding a retraction apology to now head to the court, because that clearly becomes the only avenue that we can see. When you are not complaining about unethical conduct, then the forum to go will not be, say, a commission. So if it were in Ghana, and the president often will not be minded to proceed to court, but would like to make a complaint to the NMC, once you couch the complaint in the manner of defamation, the thought of defamation, and in this case they actually say it's malicious defamation, which means there was clear intent, malice aforethought to do what they did, which they knew was wrong, was untrue, and proceeded to publish. My view, where I have appeared before the National Media Commission on a number of matters, particularly one that was dealt with not too long ago, Katie Hammond had taken multimedia on over a matter, but his particulars were clearly on matters of a thought, as in defamation. So we argued before the NMC that that was the wrong forum. If it is not about questions of ethics, of the practice, his only avenue is to go to the court. And the NMC upheld that position and dismissed Katie Hammond's case. So in this case, that's the same thing I'm seeing. The option that would be left to them. In fact, because Al Jazeera is also not in Ghana, even if it was a question of ethics, then going to NMC will not be where to take up an action.
The jurisdiction question arises, and you just touched on that. Al Jazeera isn't based here. So where would they have to sue them if that's the only option?
Right. So this has been an issue that some people have raised over a period, but the concern is a concern that is raised out of the lack of knowledge. Just recently, we had to try and procure lawyers in London to represent a client who is Ghana-based online publication sued in London, but you couldn't say that because they made a publication in Ghana, they could not be sued in London, because the authorities have now become very clear, and I'm talking about judicial authorities, that when it comes to online, internet, cyber, in the cyberspace, the courts have held that to establish that defamation has occurred, you must establish that there was a publication. When there's no publication, there's no defamation. The law is that where the publication takes place, and for the purposes of defamation claim, where the relevant words are heard or read. So it doesn't matter that you are not in Ghana. Once your publication was heard, was read in Ghana, a party that is affected has a right at law to take you on. And more particularly, if you remember a very recent matter too, Nkrumah has over 2 million, judgments to take on a practitioner. I have a difficulty calling that gentleman, that guy, a journalist. He is practicing from the U.S. and broadcasting to the whole world. But when he sued in Ghana, the courts depended on the authorities or the situation as has been taken care of in London, in Canada, and elsewhere. That his publication was clearly intended for the audience in Ghana, and that the person that the matter affected, in this case, Nkrumah, had a reputation in Ghana, and it was a good reputation, and therefore, where is he affected most? He's affected in where he's known for his reputation. Very, fabulous, nice judgment you want to read. So clearly, the president can take up the suit if he wants to sue in any part of the world, but more conveniently in Ghana. And when he wins, the questions will be, how do you enforce the judgment?
And that remains the real subject here, because I recall
it's not a
in
big
Ace's
deal.
case, I wonder if
it's not a big deal. We have a way of enforcing foreign judgments. So even if you got a judgment from outside of Ghana, for as long as we have a law, for as long as there is what we call the reciprocity, kind of agreement, you are allowed to register that judgment and enforce it. I suppose that wherever Al Jazeera is physically present, it will be the case that the same rules will be invoked and applicable to enforce a judgment against them. But they clearly will not want a situation, even where you win a judgment in Ghana, you don't enforce it. They won't like a situation where they won't comply, because they are, like you said, a global media giant. And they want to be seen to be ethical, to be respecting, because the media is not always right. Sometimes you get it wrong. And when you do, you must be respecting, you must also be seen to be ethical.
Does the fact that this involves a president, does it change anything?
I can assume that certain considerations may have to go into it, but our law, by the Constitution, there's only a qualified sort of immunity to the president against he being sued whilst he's president, and he being sued personally, as in his personal capacity for something that he has done, personally in the course while he's president. But for him to sue, I do not know of a legal, difficulty in that regard.
If you follow what the presidency had done in terms of the way this was very strongly worded, Al-Jazeera writes back and say, "We will not apologize. We will even retract." And I've been checking with the presidency. It's a decision that is currently being considered. The president, I understand, is in London as we speak, and it's come to their attention. Their view, actually, from what I've been told from the presidency, is that the Al Jazeera response to them was detailed, and that they are not interpreting that to mean they will not apologize nor retract. But Al Jazeera is very categorical in their response to us that that's what they have communicated. There's a lot of consideration that the presidents will have to make. Do you think they boxed themselves into a legal corner here by taking that first step and being that strong in their demand of retraction immediately and an apology?
Well, Evans, you see, often when things happen and we write as lawyers and we say we demand of you to retract and apologize, it is only an opportunity to you to look at what you have done again, and on advice of your lawyers also take a decision whether you will retract and apologize or not. It is not an order of a court. It's an opportunity for you. And if you take the view, and many times we have taken that view in respect of multimedia, we have taken that view. And those who were minded that they felt that they were right and yet we did not apologize and went to court, they have gone and lost. So I'm sure that they may be fortified of clearly such a media giant will have dozens of lawyers that will be advising it over such matters. Recently what a defamation suit has done to Fox, in the U.S. So, in fact, when you retract and apologize or you apologize, it is still not an immunity against you being sued anyway. It is only that you can use that as a defense, and perhaps that could minimize the damages that may come if the party who is suing you is successful. So it's their election to determine that from what they have seen, they will not apologize or retract. That's up to them. But it is left to the president also to take the step that he wants to take. But you see, when you are not certain that there is a clear matter of defamation for which you can sue, you don't do these things. Because if you do them and, the other party calls your bluff, then you are left hanging. You can't do anything because you can't sue. And if you took up a nuisance suit or a slap, you will go to court and embarrass yourself even more. So it's the president's decision to take.
Indeed it is. And as we speak tonight, they have indeed called the bluff of the presidency. The president will have to take a decision now how they approach this. And we will get you details as far as this consideration is concerned at the presidency. The president is in London as I speak and understand it has been discussed. If we get some clarity on what the presidency plans to do next, we'll bring that to you. But in the meantime, considering that in this letter to Al Jazeera, the presidency argued that the publication was not only malicious, defamatory, and a calculated attempt to tarnish the reputation of the president, but also the government of Ghana. There are obviously international relations implications for the image of this country. And I wonder what options are there to deal with that aspect of this as this now plays out squarely in the international domain. Dr. Ishmael Holovo is an international relations expert and research fellow at the Pan-African Research Group, Afro Global, and joins us on the line right now. Doc, thanks for your time here on Top Story. So you read that statement, and the presidency insists that this is not only a damage to the president's reputation, but to the government of Ghana. First of all, if you read what has happened, you agree with that, with the positioning of this, and that this is not only about the president, but about the image of the country.
Yeah,
Thank you, Evans, and good evening to your listeners. In fact, looking at the documentary and all that has transpired since it was released, it is quite damaging to the image of the country. Remember that the president is the first citizen of this nation. He represents Ghana wherever he goes, and his conduct is very critical to how people see Ghana within the international arena. So all that has happened so far is not in the good interest of this nation. Remember, Al-Jazeera is a global network, and what they put out there has the tendency to influence how other publics outside Ghana view Ghana. So in terms of what we call public diplomacy, this is not so good for the image of Ghana.
And then it raises the question, so how do you deal with it? The first attempt was to get an apology and a retraction. If that happens, then that would have dealt with it somewhat. Now, they're not getting that. They're not getting a retraction. They're not getting an apology. Where does that leave us, and how do you approach an attempt to deal with this internationally?
Okay, perhaps we acted too quickly in taking that stand. The alternative will have to be maybe we respond to the allegations that have been contained in the documentary and find a channel to project it to the audience. So, for instance, maybe we contact the same Al Jazeera and give our response to them and find a way for them to air it. That also speaks to our inability to have an African media giant that is capable of shifting the narrative in the way African countries will want it. Because without an institution like that, it is so difficult sometimes countering someone. If it is as it is, if it's a propaganda, it's so difficult for you to counter it, because then somebody else control the media you want to use to address this kind of damage. So again, we must also be looking at where is the African media giant? How do we get them to counter some of these outside damage to the image of African countries?
And that's an important point there. So Al Jazeera is a global media giant. They insist they're not going to withdraw this. In fact, as we speak, the 4-part documentary is still sitting on the many social media platform, the Al Jazeera Wales. The presidency, though, and because now we're dealing with the states now, when they've brought in the image of Ghana, are there other channels that they could use? Of course, something has explored the legal channels. The president, we have international relations experts,
Okay.
the foreign affairs. We have the foreign affairs minister. Are there other international channels that we could explore in dealing with the subject?
Okay, Al Jazeera is owned by, of course, they are hosted by a particular state.
Yes, and they're in Doha.
But mind you, we are also very careful to respect media freedom. But we could make some effort through those state institutions and try to find a way for them to give us a fair hearing in order to give our response to some of the things that they contain in that documentary. So, yes, since it is hosted by a state and we could engage that state to see how we can get our image redeemed.
In other words, and this is Qatar we are talking about. You say we should explore,
Yes.
and Qatar will have a stake in Al Jazeera. We should explore that angle as well.
Yeah, you could explore that angle so that you draw the attention of the government, and then you see how they can help you to kind of correct the if you believe that it's a misrepresentation of the facts, then you can use that channel to try to see if you can influence how they give you another opportunity to kind of get your image redeemed.
You raise a very important point, which is really the assumption there. You make the point, if indeed you have a case, before you take this route, you must be on all fours, on your side of the story, being the truth.
Yes, of course, because they also believe that what they projected out there is the truth. And we also believe that it contains misrepresentation of what the reality is. So if we so believe in our part of the story, then we could engage and present our side of the story to the other government to see how some influence could be brought to bear on them. Again, maybe you could also look at other media giants, global media giants, how to put out other information there that will counter what they have already put across.
A lot of options there. We've explored the legal options, international relations options. Thank you very much, Dr. Clover, there, with his thoughts on this particular matter. One thing is clear. The presidency, they have a decision to make on this. Al-Jazeera called the bluff. What will the presidency's response be to this particular position taken by the Al-Jazeera? In the coming hours and days, we'll get to know that. We'll bring that to you. Share your thoughts. 055 11 997. News Night in a minute.